Hi there guys, and welcome to another Cardiff Sports Nutrition video. Again today we're with Dr. Paul Rimmer. Following on from last week's video where we talked about macros and a macronutrient split, we're then each week going to be looking to in-depth for the three macronutrients. So we covered proteins last week, and today we're going to be looking at fats. What are fats? The different types of fats? Are there good fats? Are there bad fats? And just a bit more depth. So Paul, if you'd like to start off with just giving us a bit more in-depth on what fats are.
Fats fundamentally are one of the main storage forms of energy within the body. So our body stores fats as fatty acids within our adipose tissue or fat cells. From a dietary perspective, fats come in numerous different types. They're generally more energy, well they are more energy dense than carbohydrates. And this is due to the fact they have long chains of carbons which have hydrogens attached, and this is where we get our energy from foods. Within fats there's two main classifications, which are your unsaturated and your saturated fatty acids. Saturated fatty acids have what are called single carbon bonds along their fatty acid chains, whereas unsaturated fatty acids have one, two or possibly even more kinks within their chains where they have double carbon bonds. This is important because the type of fatty acid they are, whether they're saturated or unsaturated, this can really impact on how our body, sees these fatty acids. This can impact on how they're digested, how they're used for fuel, and in turn the other sort of functions that they're used in the body. I mentioned fats are primary source of energy, which of course they are, but not a lot of people know that fats actually play roles in a lot of other things as well. So the two other roles that they play is they play a lot of roles in structural properties. So a lot of cell membranes have fatty acids as a component. And also they play roles within cell signaling as well. So these things can act to actually pass information between different parts of the body as well. So fats aren't just energy, and there's other considerations that we need to look at. And from that perspective, saturated fats, like Matt alluded to, are typically seen as the unhealthier fats, and unsaturated fats are typically seen as healthier fats. There's a lot of difficulties with this. Depending on what review you read, you will get different amounts of saturated fat that are included in the diet compared to unsaturated fats. And there's also a bit, it tends to be very individual depending on how much you can get away with in terms of saturated fat intake. There seems to be no real consensus, even in this day and age with the amount of research done into the effects of fats on diets and long-term health outcomes. There seems to be no real consensus even within the community, the nutritional community and nutritional advisors to governments and so on and so forth, in terms of what the right amount of saturated fat to include in the diet is. As a general guideline, people say that it should be around about, or lower than 10% of your overall fat intake, depending on what kind of diet strategy you're employing. However, again, this tends to be dependent on impacts of genetic and lifestyle factors as to the implications that fat has in the diet. And the problem is with a lot of the studies that have actually labelled saturated fatty acids as bad is they tend to be observational studies, and the problem with observational studies is that they incorporate, or they fail to factor in, like I say, the other factors like lifestyle, exercise, other dietary factors that impact on it as well. So the truth of the matter is, I'm going to stand here before you today and say in terms of what we recommend as a saturated fatty acid intake, as a safe guideline, 10 to 15% of your diet, but actually, the reality is that I just don't know. Other people might be more informed than we do. So I think fundamentally, you need to be careful when you're including fats in the diet, but I don't think viewing fats as inherently bad is a positive thing to do. I think fats can be good. They have, like I say, many physiological benefits. But again, the amounts you include in the diet will depend really on your overall calorie intake and I guess your macronutrient ratios depending on what dietary strategies you employ. A really simple way actually to tell the difference between saturated and unsaturated fats is that saturated fats, they tend to be solid at room temperature, whereas unsaturated fats tend to be sort of more liquid based as well instead. This can actually affect the sort of digestion and absorption because again it's to do with the exposure to our digestive enzymes. So saturated fatty acids tend to take a little bit longer to digest than unsaturated fatty acids. However, when it comes to energy production, it tends to be the other way around. Simple reason for this is that enzymes involved in saturated fatty acid oxidation, it requires less steps than in unsaturated. So, when you read articles online talking about these things, the fact is there's very little information I find on fats in the diet, or specific fats other than just energy intake, simply because fatty acid metabolism, how they're used in the body, how they're broken down and synthesized into other useful bioactive compounds is actually relatively poorly understood.
I think touching on the saturated fats in terms of energy and the energy it gives you, it'd be good to quickly talk about MCTs. I'm sure a lot of you heard about, especially recently, the importance of MCTs, which stands for medium chain triglycerides. MCTs, there's a bit of misunderstanding of MCTs, and the MCTs a lot of the time are saturated fats, and so people are very up in the air on should they be eating these saturated fats if they've got MCTs. So do you mind just giving a bit of breaking down what MCTs are and why is there such a rave about them at the moment?
Okay, well, MCTs, like Matt said, are medium chain triglycerides, or triacylglycerols is the new terminology that people use them. So if you see that written somewhere, it's exactly the same thing. Normal fatty acid chains, your longer chain fatty acids, they require a process of digestion and absorption, which requires emulsification with bile acids being attacked by digestive enzymes to break them down, and this is then passed into the lymphatic system, which then is transported to the liver, with which then they are then packaged into a thing called chylomicrons, which are transported around the body to be used as energy or fuel. With MCTs, because they're shorter chains, they skip some of those steps, so they actually digest and absorb that little bit quicker, more readily into the bloodstream, which means that they can be used for a faster source of energy. There's a few debates on the usefulness of MCTs in terms of energy output. So they've been touted to be able to actually increase fatty acid oxidation and I guess help with things like fat loss. At the end of the day, they still have calories attached, so you can't just eat all the MCTs in the world and hope to get away with it. In my opinion, the benefits that MCTs do give you are in terms of if you're on a ketogenic style diet and you're after a little bit of elevation in energy, they can help with that sort of thing. However, in terms of accelerating fat loss and things, the studies show that if there are any benefits in that, they're going to be very, very minimal compared to, say, your overall calorie intake. So yes, the types of fats that we eat are important. So in other videos, I think what would be really important to do is to focus on things like omega-6 and omega-3, which are some unsaturated fatty acids which are very important to health. So they do have their specific roles that we need to be considerate of. However, I think MCTs, like I say, great for energy production. The other benefits in terms of the body are yet to be fully elucidated. I wouldn't write them off just yet, but from my perspective, it's not something that I get overly stressed about when including them in the diet. Especially, for example, if you've got plenty of carbohydrates in your diet for energy anyway, that need for that faster digestion and absorption energy is kind of really removed from that process.
Brilliant. I think there's two more things just like to quickly talk about, and that's one, mixing fats with carbohydrates. I mean, there's one side of it where a lot of people say never. I mean, I've heard things like you should never eat fats and carbohydrates in one, as your body can't digest both at the same time, leading to either the carbohydrate or the fat being stored as fat. That there's other things that say eat fats with your carbohydrates, because if you're able to eat fats with carbohydrates, then it's going to slow the digestion rate, blah blah blah. So what are your views on incorporating eating fats with a carbohydrate based meal? Okay,
there's a few positive things that can happen by incorporating fats with carbohydrates. For anyone who suffers with if you notice if you have a large amount of carbohydrates and you suffer with energy crashes after that, so as you eat carbohydrates, insulin levels rise. If you get an overabundance of insulin release, this can cause to energy crashes or low blood glucose. One of the things that fats do in the diet is they actually slow gastric emptying, okay? So they slow the digestion and absorption of carbohydrates. This leads to a lower blood glucose response, or a steadier blood glucose response. So for people who suffer with a condition called reactive hypoglycemia, which is something I just described there, where people tend to get an overshoot of their insulin, it can be a really effective tool to do that. However, even 30 or 40 grams of fat, I think from one study I remember reading, this can blunt your blood glucose response, even with pure glucose, which is pure sugar, by around about 50%, which is quite a marked impact. From the other perspective, if you're talking about refueling, so after training, obviously after resistance training or any kind of exercise really, your insulin sensitivity is improved. Therefore, you want refueling to take place at a faster rate. So the inclusion of fats at that time may be something that you want to keep out the equation. Ultimately, I think if you're trying to maintain, if you're on a mixed diet, proteins, carbs, fats, if you're trying to maintain steady energy levels, then I think that the use of fats with a meal is actually really beneficial in order to stop those peaks and troughs of energy all day long.
Agree, totally agree. And like we were saying, if you're someone who is just looking for overall functionality, 100%. I think maybe someone who's looking more towards fat loss and weight loss in general, there may be scientific benefits of adding fats to your carbohydrates, but at the end of the day, calories are calories. So if you're adding in 20 grams of fat into that carbohydrate meal, yes, it may slow the digestion, it may lower the blood sugar spike. However, that 20 grams of fat is adding nearly 200 calories to your calories throughout the day, which could be, that 200 calories could lead to weight gain. So you need to factor in on what your goals are. But anyway, lastly, what I'd just like to finish on is fats in general. Fats aren't bad. Fats are not bad. If my personal opinion is, don't get hung up on saturated and unsaturated fats. As long as you've got that balance throughout the day, try and keep to good fats. The only thing I would say is transaturated fats.
Yeah.
They are probably the only fat that you need to stay clear of as much as you can. By transaturated fats, we mean fats you get in refined meals, takeaway foods, your takeaways in McDonald's. The biggest thing that I know about please step in whenever you feel necessary, is transaturated fats are so hard on your body in terms of digestion. They actually, I've read an article once, a Big Mac from McDonald's, it takes up to, something like about a week to digest the fat in that. Can you elaborate on that at all, Paul?
I wouldn't speculate on that because I haven't read the study, and I don't speculate on things I haven't read. However, one thing I will say about trans fats is this, is they're Frankenstein fats, okay? So these trans fats were originally developed because they can be reused over and over again, because again, they're effectively not very well broken down. So this means that fast food restaurants tend to use them for cooking or deep frying because they can get used over and over again. It also helps in food preservation, so certain margarines, if you ever look and it says hydrogenated oils, be aware that there may be some trans fats in there as well. Because to make a normal fat a trans fat, it goes through a process of hydrogenation, which in short is being bombarded with hydrogen. This changes the structure and makes it basically a foreign object to the body as well. Now, aside from the digestion issues that may exist, one of the big things is it's really, really associated with the bad kind of cholesterol that we have in the body, okay? These things have really marked impact on inflammation, which isn't necessarily, isn't a good thing. And it has marked impact on things like the cholesterol, which is, linked to, many sort of cardiovascular diseases, metabolic disorders, and so on and so forth. So margarines and stuff like that can be great and convenient, but please just have a look on there as well. Some trans fats are found in very small quantities in sort of natural foods. They do naturally occur, however, the amounts are so small they're not worth worrying about. But like I say, the certain cooking oils and stuff, especially the ones that can be reused, is something that for your long-term heart health, forget dieting, forget bulking, all that kind of stuff, forget building muscle, just for your long-term health. Yeah, try and avoid trans fats as far as possible. That's one thing in terms of consensus on fat intake. I think 99.99999% of the fitness and health community would completely agree on. In fact, I'd say so far as 100% to be honest.
Brilliant. I think we'll leave it there. I think the take-home message from this regarding fats is, are fats bad for you? Absolutely not. In fact, I'd go as far as saying they're probably one of the most important nutrients to take in terms of hormonal function. So don't cut out fats from your diet. Yes, like we have just said, try to stay away from those transaturated fats. But as a whole, don't get too hung up about it. Hit your numbers and you'll be okay. So we'll leave it there. Next week, again, we'll finish it off by covering carbohydrates. Anything you guys would like to see, then please just comment below, send us a message, and I'm sure we'll get some content on it. Paul, thank you very much again for coming in, and we'll see you soon.